It's Friday the 7th of October and this is Politics UK. Hello and welcome to your weekly roundup of political and parliamentary highlights from across the UK. I'll be joined by our correspondents in Edinburgh and Cardiff and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Sean Curran. On the programme this week, the Chancellor abandons his policy of cutting income tax for the highest earners.
I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. We are listening and have listened.
The Prime Minister tells the Conservative Party conference she stands by her policies and pledged to grow the economy.
Whenever there's change, there is disruption. And not everybody will be in favour of change, but everyone will benefit from the result. A growing economy and a better future.
Her speech was briefly interrupted by Greenpeace protesters who were ejected from the hall. And the Scottish Government introduces emergency legislation freezing most rents for the next 6 months in response to the cost of living crisis.
The bill's primary purpose is to provide the protection necessary for tenants while also recognising the circumstances of landlords.
So, there's no Commons or Lords sitting at the moment. Last week we gave you the highlights of the Labour conference, so this week it's the turn of the Conservatives. And it's been a week that has been dominated by the continued fallout from the Chancellor's mini-budget and the eventual U-turn on the top rate of tax. I'm joined now by Sean Curran, so tell us what's been going on.
Well, a fortnight ago, Kwasi Kwarteng was here in Westminster delivering that so-called mini-budget. And the financial turbulence that followed really provided the backdrop for the Labour conference. And it also set the tone for the Conservative conference. As late as Sunday morning, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was telling Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC that she was committed to her plans to get rid of the top rate of income tax, the 45 pence rate that is paid by people in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. In Scotland, it's 46 pence. But they were going to get rid of that 45 pence rate. By midnight, the plan was being scrapped and the decision, the U-turn, was announced in the morning. Now, the Conservative conference was interesting this year because ministers didn't get to make their speeches until the afternoon. So there was plenty of room for people to comment and pass their verdict on what they thought the Chancellor and the Prime Minister had done before Kwasi Kwarteng eventually got to make his big speech. Now, an interesting thing this, Chancellors often work on their speeches to the party conference. They're often looking to make a big announcement. We did not have a big announcement. This was quite a short speech by the standards of these affairs, and there wasn't really any sort of note of contrition or apology for what happened. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
What a day. It has been tough, but we need to focus on the job in hand. We need to move forward. No more distractions. We have a plan, and we need to get on and deliver it. That's what the public expect. Our growth plan set out 10 days ago will ensure we focus relentlessly on economic growth, because we must face up to the fact that for too long our economy has not grown enough. The path ahead of us was one of slow, managed decline. But I refuse to accept that it is somehow Britain's destiny to fall back into middle league status, or that the tax burden reaching a 70-year high is somehow inevitable. It isn't, and it shouldn't be. But I can be frank. I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. We are listening and have listened. And now I want to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package. Because with energy bills skyrocketing, a painful COVID aftermath, war on our continent, a 70-year high tax burden, slowing global growth rates, and glacially slow infrastructure delivery, we couldn't simply do nothing. We can't sit idly by. What Britain needs more than ever is economic growth, and a government wholly committed to economic growth. That is why we will forge a new economic deal for Britain, backed by an ironclad commitment to fiscal discipline. More businesses. Cast your mind back just 4 weeks ago. We had dire warnings of extreme energy prices to come. Corner shops to heavy industry predicted unprecedented disruption. Business groups feared mass unemployment. Entire livelihoods were on the line. Make no mistake, this was a very real prospect for our country. So within 48 hours of taking office, we announced one of the most significant interventions ever conceived by the British state. Annual energy bills of up to £6,500 from next year were staring us in the face. Everybody was worried. Now we are holding down the price at an average of £2,500. Not just this winter, like the Labour Party promised, but next winter too. 2 years of significant taxpayer support to protect our people. Because this government will always be on the side of those who need help the most. When this party came into government, we were met with the full force of Labour's economic incompetence. No money left, taxes raised, record unemployment. We reversed that story of national decline. But even after 3 election defeats, they still haven't learned their lesson. The Labour Party would have you believe that every penny you earn should go straight into the government's coffers. The Labour Party believe that they know how to spend your money better than you do. The Labour Party believe that they can tax their way to growth. We don't believe that. We believe in low tax, high growth, and fiscal discipline. We are Conservatives. Yes, we have challenges to face, but our plan will take this country forward. We will get Britain moving. We will deliver lower taxes for you and your family, and we will grow our economy. I know we can achieve that goal. With grit, with drive, and with determination, we can meet the challenges of this new era. Thank you.
That was the Chancellor speaking at the Conservative Party conference on Monday. Well, we'll be hearing more from Sean as the programme goes on, including about the Prime Minister's speech at conference. Right, time to have a look at what's been going on in the Scottish Parliament this week. And our correspondent, Lindsay Bewes, joins us now from Holyrood. Now, the Scottish Government has brought forward a rent freeze as part of tackling the cost of living, hasn't it, Lindsay? How is that going to work?
Yeah, well, this emergency legislation has been fast-tracked through the Parliament. Now, it caps rents at 0% until March. There is also provision to extend that, to maintain that or vary that cap for a further 2 6-month periods. Now, the rent cap applies to private and social tenants. It does allow some exceptions for landlords facing increased costs, such as rises in their mortgage payments. And the emergency legislation also introduces a moratorium on evictions. Now, the Scottish Government says this is necessary to help tackle the cost of living crisis, but the plans have been criticised by the Scottish Conservatives.
We are bringing forward this emergency legislation in recognition of the fact that people who rent their homes are right now being hardest hit by an extraordinary cost crisis. The bill's primary purpose is to provide the protection necessary for tenants while also recognising the circumstances of landlords. The bill significantly strengthens the protection against unwarranted rent rises and eviction. It sends a strong signal to landlords about the damages that can be awarded for unlawful eviction, and it provides a bridge into the longer-term reforms that I set out in the New Deal for Tenants last December. The safeguards in this bill provide a total package of fair and robust measures. This is a government which confronts the cost crisis head-on, a government which gives people stability in their homes and assurance about their rents, a sharp contrast with those who want to cut taxes for the wealthiest and let bankers' bonuses soar.
SNP Green and Labour MSPs are about to use Scotland as a guinea pig and undermine the foundations of Scotland's housing market. Presiding Officer, international rent control schemes demonstrate the negative impact which rent controls can have, and indeed the long-term negative consequences this will have on our Scottish mixed housing market. We know how this will end. Fewer private lets, a slump in building of affordable homes, increased rents for future tenants, and students unable to secure vital accommodation to go and study at university. SNP Green and Labour MSPs will be directly to blame for this significant damage done to our housing sector. The greater housing crisis which will come from this will be at their desks, and I hope that they will also make sure that the people of Scotland hold them accountable for their actions.
So the Tories there reflecting some concerns from landlords and some housing associations as well that this move will actually reduce capacity in the housing sector because landlords could sell up and it might threaten the confidence of investors in the sector. On the other side, however, some tenants have really welcomed this move and they have welcomed the fact it is being fast-tracked.
Yeah, it sounds like one to keep an eye on there. Now, the UK COVID public inquiry began this week in London, but Scotland was also holding its own inquiry. But I understand that that has stalled. What happened?
Yes, that's right. This is the Scottish inquiry, separate to that UK inquiry you mentioned, looking at Scotland's response to the pandemic. Now, this week, we learned that the chairwoman of that inquiry, Lady Poole, and 4 members of council have quit. And that left MSPs coming to the chamber to ask questions of the government as to what was going on. Was this going to delay the inquiry? And what was the impact going to be on those families of COVID victims who are looking for answers?
I was contacted earlier today by a constituent who lost his wife due to COVID, and like many other of the bereaved members of families, has very serious concerns about what has been reported in the media and the potential delays in the inquiry now starting to take evidence. Can the Deputy First Minister tell us whether the resignation of Lady Poole was prompted by the resignation of the 4 senior council members, or was it unrelated? And secondly, can he give us an assurance that none of these resignations have come about because of any political interference in the direction or operation of the inquiry?
Deputy First Minister.
The first point I want to make is, and I hope this was clear from my last answer to Jackie Bailey, that the considerations of bereaved families is absolutely central to this inquiry. If there is any group of people in our country who must secure answers from the COVID inquiry, it must be the bereaved families. So I hope that provides reassurance for Mr Fraser to share with his constituent. In relation to the reasons for Lady Poole's resignation, Lady Poole indicated to me that for personal reasons she wished to step down from the inquiry. Those were Lady Poole's words to me, and that is what she has indicated to me, and I don't think it's incumbent on me to explore or examine the rationale for Lady Poole's statements to me. And the final point is frankly one to which I take the greatest of exception, because I have judiciously followed the contents of the Inquiries Act, and particularly Section 17, which guarantees the independence of the inquiry. And just for the record, there has been absolutely no political interference in the inquiry.
So the Deputy First Minister not wanting to be drawn there on what led to those resignations and emphasising the independence of the inquiry. There has been some speculation that maybe some of the inquiry team were a bit frustrated about a lack of progress in getting things going. Now the Scottish Government is saying it will appoint a new chair as quickly as possible, and it has given an assurance that bereaved families will be heard.
And the First Minister remains under huge pressure on NHS waiting times, doesn't she? And that was a theme at First Minister's questions.
It certainly was, yeah. It was pretty relentless for the First Minister at First Minister's Questions this week. Both the Scottish Conservatives and Scottish Labour going on that theme of the NHS. The Scottish Tories were emphasising the problems with waiting times for ambulances, while Scottish Labour was talking about waiting times for cancer diagnosis and treatment. And both of the leaders of those parties brought personal stories to the Chamber. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar talking about a man who died after seeking treatment from the NHS for over a year.
A 56-year-old man in Western Bartonshire first went to his doctor with back pain in autumn 2020. He was prescribed painkillers and told to visit a physio. 6 months later, he was passing blood and being violently sick. He called an ambulance, but was told twice that they wouldn't attend because his condition wasn't life-threatening. So he got himself to A&E and eventually had a CT scan. It showed a large tumour that had spread to his spine. He died a year after first seeking help from the NHS. This demonstrates a systemic failure and what happens when services and staff are pushed to breaking point. First Minister, do you accept that your failure to get to grips with the NHS crisis is costing lives?
For the vast majority, our NHS on cancer care and on everything else delivers an outstanding service of clinical care. Clearly, that is not the case for everyone, particularly now given the pressures faced. That's why the responsibility I have, the Health Secretary has, and the whole Government has to make sure we are supporting the NHS is such a vital one and one that we take so incredibly seriously.
Now, the First Minister also pointed to the Scottish Government's NHS winter plan that was published this week. It includes £45 million of funding for the ambulance service and an additional 1,000 staff, including 750 nurses, midwives and other NHS professionals. But these issues being faced by the NHS form part of the backdrop for the SNP's conference that's taking place this weekend until Monday, and Holyrood is going into recess for the next 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Lindsay Buse at the Scottish Parliament there. And as she mentioned, they're going into recess and the SNP conference is happening next week. So we will have coverage of that in next week's programme. Right, Sean Curran is still with me in the studio and we are going to talk more about the Conservative Party conference and Liz Truss, who gave her first speech as leader, and it'd be fair to say it wasn't, there are a lot of expectation on this speech, and she did get disrupted in the middle of it, didn't she?
Yes, and maybe the expectations actually grew as the conference went on, because, as we've said, it was a difficult conference for Liz Truss, and some senior Conservatives were speculating that perhaps her first speech as leader might also be her last. So there was a lot riding on it. She needed to calm nerves. As you say, there were some traditional elements to this. We had standing ovations, we had a protest in the middle, and of course she came on to music, and this time it was Moving On Up by M People.
This is a great country. I'm so proud of who we are and what we stand for. But I know that we can do better, and I know that we must do better. And that's why I entered politics. I want to live in a country where hard work's rewarded, where women can walk home safely at night, and where our children have a better future. To deliver this, we need to get Britain moving. We cannot have any more drift and delay at this vital time. And that's why I promised on entering Downing Street to act. Let's get them removed. Now, later on in my speech, my friends, I'm going to talk about the anti-growth coalition. But I think they arrived in the hall a bit too early. They were meant to come later on. So we'll get on to them. We'll get on to them in a few minutes. For too long, our economy hasn't grown as strongly as it should have done. I know what it's like to live somewhere that isn't feeling the benefits of economic growth. I grew up in Paisley and in Leeds in the 80s and 90s. I've seen the boarded up shops, I've seen people left with no hope, turning to drugs. I've seen families struggling to put food on the table. Low growth isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Low growth means lower wages, fewer opportunities, and less money to spend on the things that make life better. It means our country falling behind other countries, including those who threaten our way of life. And it means the parts of our country that I really care about falling even further behind. That is why we must level up our country in a Conservative way, ensuring everywhere, everyone can get on. And for too long, the political debate has been dominated by the argument about how we distribute a limited economic pie. Instead, we need to grow the pie so that everyone gets a bigger slice. I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. The Conservative Party will always be the party of low taxes. Cutting taxes is the right thing to do, morally and economically. Morally, because the state doesn't spend its own money. It spends the people's money. Economically, because if people keep more of their own money, they're inspired to do more of what they do best. That's what grows the economy. When the government plays too big a role, people feel smaller. High taxes mean you feel it's less worthwhile working that extra hour, going for a better job, or setting up your own business. That, my friends, is why we are cutting taxes. To take on Russia and other authoritarian regimes, free democracies need strong economies. Economic growth makes us strong at home and strong abroad. And we need an economically sound and secure United Kingdom. And that will mean challenging those who try to stop growth. I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back. Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, the militant unions, the vested interests dressed up as think tanks, the talking heads, the Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier. The fact is, they prefer protesting to doing. They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo. From broadcast to podcast, they peddle the same old answers. It's always more taxes, more regulation, and more meddling. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We can't give in to those who say we can't do better. We must stay the course. We're the only party with a clear plan to get Britain moving. We're the only party with the determination to deliver. Together, we can unleash the full potential of our great country. That is how we will build a new Britain for a new era.
Well, that was just some of what Liz Truss had to say in her first speech at party conference this week. Well, her first speech as leader, that is. Thank you, Sean, and we will have more from you in a moment. But now it's time to go to the Welsh Parliament and speak to our correspondent, Daniel Davis. Daniel, as we've heard, I mentioned earlier, the UK COVID inquiry began this week, and there have been calls for an inquiry in Wales as well. I understand the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, is resisting those calls, though, and actually this time he's also been accused of making insensitive remarks.
Yes, well, for months, opposition parties here have been calling for a Welsh COVID inquiry, an inquiry that will look specifically at how the Welsh Government and Welsh authorities coped with COVID-19. Families who lost loved ones to coronavirus have been making that call as well. But the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has refused, preferring to stick with that UK-wide inquiry, which is now getting underway. But that hasn't stopped people asking, including again this week when he was tackled by the Welsh Conservative leader, Andrew Davies, at question time in the Senedd.
Unlike the leader of the opposition, they are moving on from continuing to ask for something which is not going to happen. Let me be clear about that. I've told you time and time again there will be no inquiry of that sort here in Wales. They are moving on to put their energies and their efforts in making sure, as I want to see, that their questions are properly rehearsed and the best answers provided in front of the Baroness Hallett inquiry.
Stop misrepresenting their view, First Minister. Yes. Only today they've repeated the request for an independent inquiry here in Wales, and through you not allowing such an inquiry to happen, they have had to accept that the UK route is the best route for them to have these explored.
Now, also in that quite heated session, Mark Drakeford said that the world had moved on, which is a comment that raised eyebrows here. The Conservatives said it was insensitive. Plaid Cymru have asked him to withdraw his remarks. One member of the COVID-bereaved Families for Justice group said it was a shameful thing to say. The Welsh Government tells us that Mark Drakeford had in mind a statement by that group in which they said that they were shifting their focus onto the UK-wide inquiry. That may be the case, but there are still calls for him to commission a Welsh inquiry. However, he could not have been more clear this week. He said that was something that is not going to happen.
OK. Now, there have been calls for a freeze on rent, similar to what we were hearing about in Scotland before. But I understand, again, that is something that the Welsh Government is resisting. Yes,
the Welsh Government is saying that it's doing all it can to help people through the cost of living crisis. They announced £1 million for food banks this week. There are various other funds of money to tide people over available, but some say it's not enough, including Plaid Cymru, who want the Welsh Government to copy the Scottish Government's example and implement a rent freeze. But the First Minister, again, is resisting calls to do that, and he was forced to explain why in the Senedd this week.
To engineer a situation in which a flood of properties is put onto a falling market in that way is hardly likely to be to the benefit of people looking for properties to rent. So I will look more carefully than I've been able to so far at the Scottish proposals, but any idea that they are a panacea we should just pick up and put in place here in Wales, I don't think that will stand up to examination for long.
Nobody, First Minister, is arguing that they are a panacea. They need to be implemented alongside a whole range of measures. They are temporary measures because we are facing an emergency. Winter is almost upon us.
Now, the First Minister saying there that he'll look again at what's happening in Scotland, so possibly leaving the door open for some sort of Welsh rent freeze. Certainly the pressure will continue to build on him from Plaid Cymru, who have a cooperation agreement with the Welsh Labour government. And there are a few people in the Labour Party as well who are calling for some sort of freeze on rents this winter.
OK. And Daniel, turning to the mini-budgets, the UK mini-budget, which completely dominated the Conservative Party conference, what has been said in the Senedd about that?
Well, the Welsh Government, Mark Drakeford and his ministers waste no opportunity to attack the mini-budget. They say that it's unfair, that it's going to lead to a squeeze on public spending that'll hurt the Welsh Government. The Welsh Conservatives, as you might expect, sticking to their script, saying that lower taxes are the way to grow the economy. And when all this was raised in the Senate chamber this week, well, tempers flared.
These measures show that it is the UK Conservative government that's trying to ease the burdens on our households here in Wales. Due to the cut of stamp duty in England, the Welsh government is now set to receive an additional 70 million. So will the Minister tell me exactly how we're going to spend that money?
I'm absolutely astonished by, that you can stand there and have the gall to talk in that way, Janet Finch-Saunders, about the situation where we have people in Wales now who have not got their electricity on, who do not know where they're going to get their next meal from, as a result of your government. I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm sure the Llywydd will stop me anyway. But where are they going to get the 45 billion from? Where are they get? They've already had 2 U-turns. Where are they? So I tell you where the Resolution Foundation says it's either cutting public services or it's going to cut welfare benefits, which will cause more poverty and destitution.
Now, ministers saying they will do all they can, use all of the powers at their disposal. One of the powers at the Welsh Government's disposal is to raise income tax. And there have been a lot of questions to the government as to whether they will reapply that 1 penny on income tax, on the basic rate of income tax in Wales, to perhaps boost public spending a little bit. They haven't ruled that out. All they've said is that we'll have to wait for the finance minister here to deliver her budget nearer Christmas, later on at winter time, at Christmas time. In the meantime, that idea seems to be very much on the table. They certainly haven't ruled it out.
No, it certainly sounded very heated. Thank you very much, Daniel Davies in Cardiff. Right, as we said, we're going to talk more about the Conservative Party conference. Sean is still here. So earlier we heard those speeches from the Chancellor and from Liz Truss, the Prime Minister. But we also heard, of course, from other Cabinet Ministers at the Conservative Party conference, including from the new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. What did she have to say? Because there have been a couple of notable interventions this week.
Yes, well, she certainly made a bit of a hit on the fringe of the conference with some of her comments. Perhaps the most notable was when she said that her dream was to see a plane going off to Rwanda by Christmas, taking people who had arrived in the UK illegally off to Rwanda. So that's obviously set the tone, big build-up for her speech. There was a lot of interest in it. Very much kind of traditional Conservative Home Secretary's speech, really. Very tough on the brief, which is obviously something that goes down very well in the conference hall. And she also did actually have a new policy to announce.
Now, the Prime Minister and I want to see homicide, serious violence and neighbourhood crime fall by 20%. Some of our most committed and courageous people serve in the police. So yes, I'm immensely proud of our police. Now, many on the left, they want to defund the police. Well, I say to the militants, I say to the anarchists and the extremists, no, I will always back our police, men and women. But we also need to be frank when things go wrong. Some police officers have fallen devastatingly short of the standards expected. We need to get back to common sense policing, empowering the police to tackle the issues facing the public, not policing pronouns on Twitter or non-crime, not policing non-crime hate incidents. It's very easy to say that the culture wars are a distraction. But make no mistake, the left are attacking our profound elemental values, wanting to replace them with the poison of identity politics. And when this poison seeps into the public sphere, it distracts our public servants from doing their real job. That philosophy dominates the Labour Party, whatever Sir Keir Starmer pretends. And that's why it's not only wrong for the police to take the knee, it is wrong for them to join in with political demonstrations. It is wrong for biologically male police officers to strip search female suspects. And it's not just that pandering to identity politics is a huge waste of time. They need to stick to catching the bad guys. Now, I backed Brexit because I wanted Britain to have control over our migration and to cut overall numbers. Brexit was meant to give us a say on how we determine our own migration policy. We should use our newfound control to deliver the kind of migration that grows our economy. For example, that helps projects that have stalled or builds friendships and relationships with our allies. But the truth is, parts of our system aren't delivering. We need to end the abuse of the rules, and we need to cut down on those numbers that aren't meeting the needs of our economy. And lastly, we've got to stop the boats crossing the Channel. This has gone on for far too long. But I have to be straight with you. There are no quick fixes, and the problem is chronic. Organised criminal gangs are selling a lie to thousands of people. Many are drowning in the Channel. Many are leaving a safe country like France and abusing our asylum system. So what's our plan? Firstly, our work with the French has prevented about half of all the crossings. Now, I know that that alone will not work. So I will work closely with the French to get more out of our partnership, both on the French coastline and further upstream against the organised criminal gangs. Secondly, we need to find a way to make the Rwanda scheme work. Thirdly, we need to do more to get asylum seekers out of hotels, currently costing the British taxpayer £5 million a day. And fourth, we cannot allow a foreign court to undermine the sovereignty of our borders. It's time to put the will of the hard-working, patriotic majority at the heart of all we do. It's time for the police to stop virtue signalling and start catching robbers and burglars. It's time to tackle the small boats, no ifs, no buts. Friends, it's time for common sense. I stand ready to serve you. I stand ready to deliver. The time is ours. The time is now. Thank you, conference.
So Suella Braverman addressing the Conservative Party conference, they're really doubling down on some of those things. And we also heard from the new Health Secretary, Therese Coffey, didn't we?
Yes. Therese Coffey is going to be one of the most influential members of the Cabinet. She isn't just the Health Secretary, she's also the Deputy Prime Minister, and we know that she is somebody that Liz Truss trusts very much. So this was an interesting moment. Now, Therese Coffey used her speech to basically re-emphasise something she had told Parliament just a couple of weeks ago, in fact, the day before the mini-budget. She had made a statement, perhaps got a little bit lost in all of the...
Unsurprisingly, no one remembers that now. Yeah.
Because of what happened with the mini-budget. So her strategy is A, B, C, D, which is ambulances, backlog, care, doctors and dentists. So those are her priorities, and that formed the basis of her speech to the Conservatives this week.
It is precisely because healthcare matters so much that we need to have an honest discussion
and be prepared to hold the NHS to account, forging a partnership with them focused on delivery, not dogma. So let's be honest. While most patients receiving care in our NHS have a good experience, too many do not. Whether it's the 8 a.m. scramble to see a GP, or the long waits to get tests or treatment, or the struggle to see an NHS dentist at all. Much of this has been made worse by the pandemic, and I must level with you, backlogs are expected to rise before they fall, as more patients come forward for diagnosis and treatment. There is still too much variation in patient experience. I saw that for myself this July when I went to A&E. I waited nearly 9 hours to see a doctor before being asked to return the next day for treatment. Now, I knew from previous experience that would be too late, so I took myself to a different hospital and was treated that same day. That is the sort of variation we see across the NHS, from two hospitals just a couple of miles apart, and it must change. That is why my first job in the department was creating our plan for patients, which puts the needs of patients front and centre. Now, you may have heard ABCD are my immediate priorities. And no confidence I wasn't broadcasting my A-level results to the nation. Nor was I reciting a new hip-hop beat by Dr. Dre. Those 4 letters represent my commitment to focus resolutely on the issues that affect patients most. Ambulances, backlogs, care, doctors and dentists. The waiting list for planned care, made worse by the pandemic, currently stands at about 7 million. This includes people waiting for diagnosis to know if they need any treatment at all. While in England we have now virtually eliminated waits of over 2 years, we are speeding up our plans to roll out community diagnostic centres as well as new hospitals. And we will maximise the use of the independent sector too when patients are waiting too long for treatment.
So Therese Coffey there, and of course she is setting out plans for the NHS in England. It's a devolved issue, so other ministers will deal with that in Wales and Scotland.
Yes, important to remember that. And Parliament finally they're back in Westminster next week after what feels like an absolute age. So what can we expect?
Well, in a way, they're going to pick up where they left off because on Monday, the House of Lords returns. They are going to have a big debate on the economy. And then on Tuesday, the House of Commons comes back and the first minister at the dispatch box is the Chancellor. He's taking Treasury questions. There's bound to be a lot of questions. Maybe he will be making some kind of mini statement. There is an opportunity for ministers near the end of questions, something they call topical question time, when they can make a brief statement. Then we are supposed, if there are no urgent questions or statements, to have all the stages of legislation that will repeal the plans for the social care levy. So we had the national insurance increase, which, as we know, has been scrapped. And then from next year, that was supposed to be this new social care levy, and that is going to be replaced. Over in the House of Lords, peers will get their first chance to debate the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. Now, all sorts of talk in the last few weeks about what will happen to this bill. Will this be Liz Truss's first parliamentary challenge? Well, there may be other challenges, but interestingly, Lord Heseltine, during the Conservative conference in Birmingham, predicted that this bill would be, in his words, massacred when it got to the House of Lords. So things will start moving pretty quickly as soon as Parliament comes back.
And just to keep an eye on those Conservative backbenchers, I think, as well, and that mood coming off the back of conference.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how they'll react? Will they rally behind the Chancellor on Tuesday morning, or will they have a lot of very difficult questions?
Yes, absolutely. All eyes on those questions. OK, well, Sean, thank you so much for all your insight today. It's invaluable. That is all we have got time for today with Politics UK. Joe will be back with you on BBC Two at 12:15 on Monday with Politics Live. But from me and from Sean here in Westminster, goodbye for now.